All right, so this video is going to be on geographic terms. We're going to go over some land features and water features. I believe there's 18 land features and 12 water features. And these are terms I've been using all year. Some terms you've been using since you were about 6 years old and probably even before then. And some would be brand new, but these are things you can use for your cartography project and just to kind of keep an eye out for the rest of the year. And a paper copy of this will also be uploaded to the Google Classroom. So if you want to see the paper that I'm currently using to make this video, that'll be up digitally on your Google Classroom. So we start off with land features. The first one is a one that's pretty obvious. That's a mountain. I'm not sure really exactly where a hill becomes a mountain. I mean, how many feet high something has to be. There are hills, officially hills, that are 2 or 3 thousand feet high. There are some 2 or 3 thousand foot high land features that they also call mountains. So it's all just based in the name. If you're getting higher than 3 or 4 thousand feet, it's almost always going to be called a mountain. So the official definition is a high landform with steep sides that is higher than a hill, and I think we know what a mountain is. If you have a bunch of mountains in a row, that'd be a mountain range. So the difference between those two, a mountain is one. So if I was going to say Mount Rogers, that's one mountain. If I was going to say the Blue Ridge Mountains, that's a mountain range because that's a whole bunch of them in a row. So it's a row or chain of mountains. If that mountain is exploding with really hot molten lava shooting out of it, we call that a volcano, which is another one I'm pretty sure we already know. We'll get to that when we get to Hawaii. Um, most active volcanoes can be found around the Pacific Ocean, so the western part of the United States, and then other spots around the world. And then probably the most basic term on our list is the term hill, and that's just a little bump in the ground, a rounded raised landform that's not quite as high as a mountain. There are some really, really flat states where the highest point in the entire state is a hill, and we'll get to that when we get to like Indiana and Illinois and Ohio. Scrolling down just a bit, and I try to group these as best I can. We have valley, basin, and canyon, which are, again, probably terms that we've heard independently. We see a valley is an area of lowland between hills or a mountain. That should be or. I'll make that change before I upload to Google. Sometimes they have rivers going through them. You'll hear that as a river valley, like the Shenandoah River Valley. But it's just that lowland that's in between two mountains, or in some cases, two hills. A basin is kind of like a valley, except it's more bowl-shaped. It's more rounded at the bottom. Um, you can hear sometimes about a river basin. We'll talk about the Great Basin, which doesn't get its name because of how great it is. It gets its name because of how big it is, and that's out in the western part of the country. But if you see basin, it's kind of like a valley, just rounder. And then canyon, like the Grand Canyon, is a deep, narrow valley with steep sides. It's usually carved out by a river. You'll find that down at the bottom. Similar to a valley or a basin, although you don't always see mountains on the side of a canyon. Sometimes it's something flatter, of which we'll get to in just a moment. Moving on. Island, which is another one that I think we've known since we were about 5 years old. That's when land is completely surrounded by water. I mean, completely surrounded. Um, a peninsula is similar. The definition I was always taught when I was your age was a body of land that's surrounded by water on three sides. I think the definition I have is a little better, which is a body of land nearly surrounded by water, which means it's almost completely surrounded, but not quite. If you want to think about Florida as a great example of a peninsula, Michigan is actually two peninsulas, and we'll talk about that when we get to the Midwest. This one is probably new. It's called an archipelago, and that's when you get a group of islands that are all kind of bunched together. Most are referring to, for the United States, you have Hawaii, which is an archipelago. There's a group of islands off of Alaska that kind of makes like a tail that are called the Aleutian Islands. And if you're looking for global examples, Japan is an archipelago. It's a group of islands. And also Indonesia has a whole bunch of islands, so that's also an archipelago. That one's probably new. The next three are very closely related. I know you guys know what a plateau is because you studied the Appalachian Plateau last year. That's kind of like a mountain. It's elevated, but it's going to be flat on top. So it's not jagged, it's not round, it's really pretty flat. And a plateau is generally huge. I mean, hundreds of miles across. A mesa, and if you're a Spanish speaker, you know that mesa is actually a Spanish word for table, is basically like a plateau, it's just not as big. So it's a big rock formation. It's pretty high. It's flat on top, but it's not big enough to be a plateau. And the third one you have to be careful with for obvious reasons. That is pronounced Butte. I'll say that again, Butte. That could be especially embarrassing because there's a place in the United States that is actually called Elephant Butte. And if you mispronounce that, asking where Elephant Butte might be, people start to kind of look at you funny. It's Butte. Rhymes with cute. And it's cute because it's a small plateau. It's the smallest of the group. It's actually smaller than a mesa. So again, elevated, flat on top, smaller than a mesa, much smaller than a plateau. So the plateau is the biggest, mesa is in the middle, and Butte is the smallest, and that's why it's cute. We have two areas of flatlands, plains, which you guys learned about coastal plains last year. We're going to learn about all the coastal plains and also the Great Plains and the Central Plains this year. And that's just a large area where the land is almost completely flat. Might have some hills here and there, but for the most part, it's extraordinarily flat. A prairie is basically plains that has grass covering it. So the Great Plains and the Central Plains are, for the most part, prairies. They're covered almost entirely with grass. The coastal plains, while there is some grass, there's also a lot of sand because it's right there on the shore. So all prairies are plains, but not all plains are prairies. I hope that's not confusing. I'm sure it is. The next two I put together because they're landforms that are built by something else. A levee is usually built by people, although sometimes they occur in nature also. And they're basically walls that are built next to rivers to make sure that the river doesn't flood. So when people build them, they build them usually out of concrete and, make them permanent structures that are meant to hold back rivers. The Mississippi has a lot of levees there. If it's a river that is flooding very quickly because there's a huge rainstorm coming through, what they might do is fill up bags of sand and stick that next to the rivers in an effort to try to keep the river water in the river and not destroying things in the town or the city nearby. Sometimes you have giant mounds of dirt that have been made naturally, and they kind of serve as a levee. And the last one there is delta, and that is land made of silt left behind as a river drains into a larger body of water. So that's actually land that's made by a river, because the river, through a process that you learn about in science called deposition, is carrying deposits of dirt and sand and rock and stuff like that, which is called erosion. And then when the river turns and kind of it jams all that dirt together, it actually makes landforms that we call deltas. The Mississippi River actually is the biggest of the deltas in the United States. And the last one is one that I know you know, and that is, and I can't get to it, I apologize. It's a desert. You know what a desert is. It's dry, cacti, mice, camels, other things that can live in hot, dry areas. So those are our 18 land features. Again, this will be posted to Google Classroom. You can check out the second video for this section, which is on water features, and I'll also get into some specific ones for the United States, some really big ones for the United States, so you can kind of see examples on a map.